Alrighty. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is such a pleasure to be here with everyone, both in person and virtually. And I want to thank the Muslim Mental Health Conference, Dr. Farah Abbasi, Dr. Hamada Hamid, and Dr. Bumi, and all of those who were too many to name who are involved in the conference and the organizing of the conference and just being here to make this happen. Dr. Farah Abbasi gave me such a big hug when I saw her just recently. She said that when she sees me, it reminds her of Dr. Cheryl El-Amin. And so we always want to just make dua for Dr. Cheryl El-Amin, who was a part of the organizing of this conference for many years. My name is Dr. Aneesah Nadir. I am a retired Arizona State University professor. I'm a social worker for more than 40 years, and I serve as the president of the Islamic Social Services Association and the president and CEO of Dr. Aneesah Nadir and Associates. I am here today to share with you a little bit about our understanding with regard to social justice at home and in the community. With me are my colleagues and partners, and I'll let Dahir Nasser go ahead and introduce himself. Would you share a little bit about yourself, Dahir?
Yeah, sure. How's my audio first? It's good? Okay, cool. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. My name is Dahir Nasser. I'm currently in Nairobi, Kenya, visiting some family. My background is in public health and psychology. I worked for many years at the California Department of Public Health, working on particularly health equity issues. And then I transitioned after my time there into the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development to stand up a couple of community reinvestment grant programs that funded nonprofit organizations and local health departments to do all sorts of social determinants of health work, including mental health treatment work. For the past year or so, I've been doing more private practice work and consulting work in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and direct mental health services. It's a little bit about my background. Excited to be with you all virtually here from Kenya.
Thank you, Dahir. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Zarinah Nadir.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Zarinah Nadir, and my background is an attorney. I love being an attorney. I focus primarily on juvenile law, so juvenile justice, representing children who have been accused of crimes, in addition to representing parents who have had their children removed from them based on abuse or neglect allegations. And then also working some in family law. My favorite area there are prenuptial agreements, so the preventative side of law. I also focus on access to justice related to all areas, because justice is not just out in the community, it's also at home. So areas such as access for women, for children, for immigration matters, for civil rights matters, for employment law issues, for landlord-tenant issues. So, so it's been exciting. I am the daughter of a social worker, Dr. Aneesah Nadir. So I kind of took on the social work side of the law, but I'm definitely a lawyer. So I will bring that perspective, that lens to our conversation today that I'm very excited to have. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Nadir.
Can you get us on?
Yes, let's share screen.
To advance with
Yeah, I'll advance for Dahir.
All righty. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, once again. So again, our topic this afternoon is social justice at home and in the community. And we want to remind everyone, that didn't come through. It's not on screen.
It'll probably just take a second.
Yeah, I don't see it there either.
It's on the Zoom though? Okay.
So the audio people back home, but they're not seeing it, and that's not good.
Oh, yeah, we are.
We're not. We're not. Hold on, everyone. We're having our technical issues.
That work? All right, let's just stop sharing real quick. And then let's try to share again. Take this one. Strange.
It's not going.
All right, just a second.
Doesn't appear at all.
All right. Don't know what the issue is, but 1 second. One second. Okay. Just 1 second, everybody.
You're good, Z.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And just so you know, I could see the presentation. It wasn't in presentation mode, but I could see it.
Except our in-person audience could not see.
Okay, I understand.
We want to.
Okay, how's that? How's that?
Remote, it's the same. We can see the slides, but it's not in presentation mode. We see the whole slide deck.
But for the remote, it's not even.
I don't understand.
Are you sharing it as a Google presentation?
No, just a PowerPoint. So on Zoom, what does it look like?
We can see the slides, but it's not in presentation mode. It's in like regular editing mode.
How about you guys take care of this screen and I'll take care of this when you switch off switch.
All
So that's
right.
your presentation too. The format might be a little bit off, but at least you'll see it.
Okay. Okay, so for you all, we want to make sure you all see it here, and he'll make sure everybody else sees it online. Okay, good. All righty. Sorry, everyone. It's a boon or bane when it comes to technology.
So what is that?
Not your fault.
No, it's not up there. It was up there. It's not there.
So on Zoom, we see slides. The formatting's a bit off because it's in Google Slides, but I think it's.
Yeah.
They can't see it here in the room.
Yeah.
Why is that? I don't understand. All right, guys. I don't understand what to do.
Is it not connected?
It wasn't.
Is there any tech support available?
Can we? I thought maybe we need. That's it. I tried that. All right.
No time is going by.
I don't know how we just lost it.
Yeah, it was there. Now
It
it's
looks
not.
like a monitor.
This guy. You want to huddle around the festival?
There we go.
With that?
When you switch, I'll switch. So, I'll take care of Zoom. You guys just take care of the room.
Okay, I don't know what that means, but I guess we'll just
You're
look
good.
here. We'll look here.
Just present to us.
We'll present to you using this. Okay. All right, doctor. You're
Okay.
up.
Alhamdulillah. So
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody. So we want to just remind all of us, as we talk about social justice at home and in the community, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As we know, that's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And for us, that is a real.
So he's gonna advance it.
Oh, okay.
Advance.
I'll watch you guys.
So advance.
You advance on your part.
It's not.
We
Oh,
can't.
there it is. Well, it's not going there. You have to advance it. Go ahead.
No,
See,
that one's you. That's for you. I'll end up with it.
it's not. It's not.
It's not working like that.
What-
Right.
Advance it and see what happens. Because now we have something
You're-
else. When we advance here,
So are you saying maybe we need
Yeah,
to
you
come
guys
down
need to come.
here?
Yeah, that one. You guys use this. I'll
Okay.
use this one.
Okay, there we go.
okay, what are we using? You do this.
Okay.
You do that.
Okay.
I won't do it. That's crazy. It's totally
Okay.
crazy.
Sorry. You got it, you
That's
got it.
okay.
So, alhamdulillah, we get flexible, right? What we got to do. The health of our communities and the health of our homes are inextricably linked. And we saw that clearly over this past 2 years. Our communities were sick with racism. COVID-19 shut down, removed all of the distractions from the reality. So we got to see live and in living color what we've been living with, you know, and very real. And if we vigorously oppose injustice out in the community, we must not neglect addressing it at our home. So that would be hypocritical, right? And sometimes that's what we do, right? We get out there and we march and then we come home and we got all these issues. And so that's a really big concern. Home means a private home and an internal Muslim community. So we're referring both to our home at home, our own private space, but our home is our Muslim community, our Muslim community home, our masjid home, right? And so we're talking about both when we refer to at home. When we have healthy families, we have healthy communities, and it translates. It's very clear, and the research tells us that, you know, when we have healthy children at home and they're safe and secure, and the spouses are in a loving relationship, that's going to translate, right? And it's, as I said, hypocritical to go out and proclaim fighting injustice, you know, and then inside the home we're abusive. You know, we have, you know, foul mouths, we're mean to one another, we don't appreciate, the sakina is not there, you know, the rahma and the muwada is not there. And so that is really, that's really important for us to keep in mind as we talk about how, talk about social justice at home and in the community. Injustice in the community bleeds into the home life. And we saw that during COVID. We saw how it began to bleed in to the home life. We've seen it periodically. Peaceful Family Project, Sister Selma was honored today. That's part of the message that she's been teaching over the many years. So, and you can't separate social justice. It's not something that separates you, you know, social justice when it comes to anti-Black racism or social justice within the home and how women are, and families and children are treated. And so that's the foundation, that is the introduction to what we're going to begin to talk about today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dahir Nasser.
Thank you, Dr. Nadir. So the reality is that the toll that the pandemic has caused on our community is multifaceted. I'm gonna focus primarily on a public health lens and social determinants of health lens. And I'm gonna start by just referencing this study that was done in 2021 by a group of researchers, and this article was published in the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, and it talked about disparities in COVID-19 outcomes by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. And many of us know these outcomes to be to be, self-evident, to be true, but I think it's always important to start these conversations with the data and the scientific research to back it up. And this group did a really good job of reviewing the available information and studying the data and really telling us what we had already suspected, which is that people of color were hit harder, were hit faster, and had to deal with more consequences as a result from the COVID-19 pandemic, which, as Dr. Nadir discussed, was really exacerbating other epidemics that were already with us in society. Next slide, please. So I have about 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to keep it pretty succinct. And in my time, I'm going to try to share sort of some specific issues that have been identified through the work that I've been doing during the pandemic, and then also share a few lessons learned and some goals that we can work towards as a community of Muslim mental health practitioners and advocates to hopefully move both the discourse and the actual realities on the ground forward. And I'm going to start by sort of using my work at the governor's office as a bit of a case study. Next slide, please. So apologies, the formatting is a bit off on the screen on Zoom, but this is a little bit of a recap of the California Community Reinvestment Grants Program, which is one of the programs that I started and helped to really build and stand up at the governor's office. There was some language put into Proposition 64, which legalized adult use cannabis in California. About 4 sentences of law that we took and turned into a whole program focused on being a resource to address and repair the multi-general impacts of the war on drugs. And I'm using the issues of the war on drugs to sort of help us understand, the realities of what was happening when the pandemic hit, right? There were already many social injustices and social issues that we were having to deal with. And then on top of that came COVID. But just to give folks in the room a little bit of information about what the war on drugs is, for folks who may not be familiar, the war on drugs refers to the effort in the United States since the 1970s to combat illegal drug use by greatly increasing penalties, enforcement, and incarceration for drug offenders and people who are just struggling with substance abuse disorders. Decades of federal and state policies drastically increased funding for drug control and enforcement agencies while imposing harsh penalties for even low-level, non-violent drug offenses. The war on drug disproportionately impacted, the populations that we would expect: African-American, Black, Latino, Hispanic populations. One example is, even though Black and Hispanic populations use and sell marijuana, can we go back, please, at similar rates as white populations, these groups have historically been arrested more frequently for marijuana violations. And similarly, a lot of really disparate criminal justice and law enforcement policies have really come out to continue to penalize these populations of color, including minimum prison sentences, 3-strike laws, longer prison sentences for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. And these things really grew the prison industrial complex. They exacerbated mass incarceration and have really limited populations' access to social services, educational attainment, because they haven't been able to access financial aid. They haven't been able to access public housing, public assistance. And obviously, there's been a lot of separation families. And so our program was given funding to help to invest in these populations and communities to help repair some of these harms. It was essentially a reparations program, although we weren't allowed to say quite those same words. Next slide. So through that work, we were able to identify some things that I think, as a group, we felt like were important for any organizations, institutions, even, individual citizens or folks interested in doing social justice work. Like, what are the things that need to be prioritized, and what are the issues, right? So the first issue is that everyone needs to use their voice, and particularly from an institutional perspective, we can shape the public discourse by really raising our voice and being aware of what's happening. And during the pandemic, obviously, we all had to stop what we were doing, stay at home, and really be online, which put a lot of things right in our face in terms of what was happening. So using our voices became very, very critical. The second important point is to have vision and to present a vision for your stakeholders that is about integrating disciplines, frameworks, models, and really presenting a clear, comprehensive strategy for promoting and increasing social justice and healthy people. And then the third issue is that many institutions were not doing enough to invest in building the capacity of populations that were being harmed. And so this is something that everyone can do, and everyone should be encouraging institutions to do more investment. So using whatever vehicles, financial vehicles they have to increase investment. Next slide. Additionally, it's very much important to not take a off-the-shelf kind of approach to social justice work. The reality is that each issue, while there may be some common links, the reality is each issue will require particular interventions and particular lenses that need to be population specific. So a lot of folks, got excited during the pandemic around racial equity and social justice. And we saw people kind of stepping into the work without a lot of the background knowledge that was required to help reach the populations that needed to be reached. And they didn't really do a good job of targeting the efforts to really serve the populations that needed to be served. It was kind of a, if you had a following, then you could get access to the funding versus, those who have really been on the ground doing the work for years and years and years. So really being intentional about targeting populations, intentionally tailoring programs versus just sort of picking up evidence-based practices that may not have been tested on the population that you're working with. And then really leaning into technical assistance and capacity building, and not expecting that each organization will be able to sort of have all of the wherewithal and know how to deliver on program objectives, especially given the sort of evolving environment that was the pandemic. Next slide, please. So at the end of it, really the goals boil down to three. And I think if we're all able to sort of internalize these three C's, no matter what type of program work you're doing or institution you work for, we will be able to move both the conversation forward and the provision of any type of services forward. One is really thinking about how we get cash in the hands of those populations who have been, low SES, who have been low income, who have been historically disadvantaged. That is critical. There's, a lot of, I think, fear about giving individuals and families financial assistance, but the data that I've seen and the experience that I have has shown really that financial assistance is a key and critical tool for any social justice efforts. The second is really transferring the control from institutions to folks as close to the problem on the ground as possible. And that can be hard. Many of these organizations, feel a sense of accountability to funders and taxpayers and sort of other entities. But the reality is that when you relinquish some of that control, it increases the relationships and the trust with the people that you're serving, and they're able to lead the work in a way that is most impactful for them. And then the third goal is really to increase capacity. So as much as it should be about provision of services, it should also very much be about building the capacity of those who you're working with to carry on the work for themselves and to make it sustainable by having them have the institutional capacity to do so. So one example of that is many funders and institutions try to keep indirect costs or administrative costs really low because they think that that shows that they're being efficient and sort of lean. But the reality is that often, cuts the legs out from the sustainability of the work because people aren't able to build the technical capacity, having legal and IT and other sort of key functions built out, which will carry the work forward for years to come.
Thank you, Dahir. That reminded me of my social policy class and how important and what the connection is between the macro and the micro, and social policy affects practice and the practice affects policy. So we don't understand what's going on the larger community level, we're not going to be able to affect social change. And consequently, we're not going to be effective practitioners of service on the micro or direct practice or clinical level. So thank you very much for that. Now I want to turn it over
Absolutely.
to Zarinah Nadir. Thank you so much. We'll finish and then we'll come back for Q&A.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, greetings. So let's take a legal lens on what was going on coming out of the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. And this all really feeds into each other. When we look at social justice, we have to take a multifaceted approach. It's not just the legal side. It's not just the public health side. It's also the legal side, the public health side, the social work side. There's spiritual aspects. All of those aspects really feed into it. I'm going to come with the legal lens. And one of the things that we saw early on in the pandemic, and again, this wasn't anything new. This was just a confirmation of the inequities in the social justice system and the inequities in the treatment of the Black and Brown communities of our country. We saw front and center the public lynching of George Floyd, right, in May of 2020. And there were no other distractions going on, so everyone was watching it. Everyone saw it. And interestingly, I was in Istanbul and I was talking with some folks from Holland, and they said, we were watching it, we saw. And so it's really powerful to see that the whole world stopped at that point, and the whole world could not deny what was happening. So on a legal side, we were seeing legal social justice side, we were seeing an encroachment on obviously just a total disregard for civil rights, a total disregard for constitutional liberties, total disregard for in a community that doesn't have access to justice. And I'll talk about some of the advocacy work that I was able to do during that time. And sadly, this was a horrific, awful circumstance. It was also a catalyst to open up some minds and to open up some ears and open up some hearts as well. But this was clear violation of constitutional rights and civil rights as well. Then we saw what came after that. Protests, right? And demonstrations. Well, publicly speaking and politically speaking, in some cases, we're calling them protests. Others were calling them, resurgence and this kind of rebellion. And so that terminology was also part and parcel of the inequities that our society just already had. Well, we might not have been able to fully grasp and understand everything that's going on until January 6th happened. And there was another protest, quote unquote, right? And so there was, on the one hand, you had folks now saying, well, what happened to all the language of this being rioters? What happened to that language, right? What happened to the First Amendment protester rights that were being encroached on when the Black Lives Matter multicultural crowds were out there protesting? That was protesting. They were using their First Amendment rights, but there was a lot of encroachment on their First Amendment rights there. The right to peaceably assemble. Okay, and so I was receiving phone calls from people who were going out protesting, but they were being arrested. Their rights were being encroached upon. But then we look at January 6th, and I guarantee everybody who's on this call and probably everybody in this room will say, if there was just a little more melanin in that crowd, the police wouldn't have acted the way they did on January 6th. If there was just one hijabi in that crowd, we know what would have happened. And we have a very clear eye view of exactly what happened, because just a few months before, there were Black Lives Matter protests that were happening in the exact same area. But the whole National Guard was called out. There was heavy policing, heavy militarization of the situation. But when January 6th happened, oh, where's everybody? We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough police. They looked at it in a totally different way. And this again speaks to the inequities and the racism and the systemic racism that our country has. And even still, we saw there were arrests that were happening at Black Lives Matter. But on January 6th, there were retroactive arrests, right? It was like, okay, you could arrest people then, but what's going on? Now we got to go find them. Unfortunately, people are turning them in. There was a hotline, right? But sadly, the white domestic terrorist is treated even better than just the peaceful, honest Black protester in this country. And we were seeing that face to face, right? So sure, there are some people who are being prosecuted. We had some folks who came from my hometown, Arizona. I don't know if you all remember that guy with the horns who was out there like shirtless. That was from my state. I didn't know him though, believe me. But I know somebody who did know him, if you believe that. Yeah, these are real people. Okay, so, but still, the point is when we look at the inequities and we look at how unjust sometimes this justice system is and the lack of access, so guarantee, a lot of the white community were able to lawyer up. A lot of the Black and brown communities, they're scrambling. Who do I find? How do I get Bryn Crump's number, right? Like they're scrambling, okay? So the lack of access has always been an issue, and it just continued to be an issue and it was put on center stage. We saw some federal law updates during this time as well. Well, we saw Juneteenth being signed into law. So this is a federal holiday now that was being recognized. Juneteenth is recognized as the day when the final people of African descent who were enslaved in the United States finally got the word that the Emancipation Proclamation, which was abolishing slavery, that's when they finally got the word. It was already enacted, but they got the message way late. They were like, we need to get a little more free labor out of these folks. So Juneteenth, it was a June 19th, that's when that happened. So now, after all these years, it's been kind of celebrated underground. Now there's actually a holiday. Casually speaking, Black people are like, what do we get for that? Can we just get reparations? We need a holiday. We got to work anyway. So, but those kinds of things were happening. We're like, we're not going to get the day off. Who's this helping? Anyway, but then VAWA was also just recently reaffirmed. VAWA is the Violence Against Women's Act. It was reaffirmed with certain enhancements that were needed. So some of those enhancements were the tribal communities are now able to prosecute non-native offenders. So on the tribes, there would be people who were come onto the tribes and come onto their protected lands, rape, abuse women on their native lands, but they didn't have the authority to prosecute them. So now the VAWA enhanced it so that they can now prosecute those people. I mean, can you believe that? They can't even protect their own women, right? And then also there has been so VAWA is to fund some programs also. So one of the things that is also working on is equipment that's going to be able to detect bruising on darker skin tones. And then sadly, still we're dealing with a world of law that still doesn't quite understand domestic violence. When you get into the legal arena, there are still judges that have no idea, they don't understand, they just think it's a family dispute. They just think when couples are coming into the court for a divorce and it's contentious, they're just like, these people can't handle their own problems on their own. We got to take, they still don't understand. Sadly, that's a lot of them. I'm not saying it's all of them, but sadly, it's a lot of them. So a lot of them still don't understand emotional abuse. They don't understand psychological abuse, spiritual abuse. They don't acknowledge it. If you don't see a bruise, it didn't happen, right? All of these kinds of things are still part of the inequities within our social justice system. But here was a little, kind of a step in the right direction. So continuing on the legal lens, we had immigration issues that were happening during this time. I also received phone calls from people who are saying, my family is stranded in Pakistan. They got stuck there. They got stuck in Somalia. They got stuck. What do we do? How do we handle this? So the lack of access to legal counsel has been an issue for the rest of us. It's been an issue for all of us who don't have the last name Rockefeller and, didn't establish Yale, right? Like, it's been an issue for us. So when life happens, which it does, legalities are a part of our life, people are scrambling. They're stuck. So that was on one end. But then you had some folks who came to the US to visit, and they were calling me saying, my visa's running out, but now I'm facing closed borders, right? And canceled flights. What do? I know that we can't just overstay our right? And our visa in the US. So these issues were happening. And can you imagine the mental and emotional stress that was going on with families during this time? So we have that happening. We had missed janazas, right? Again, also because of immigration laws. We have a friend who was on her way to Bangladesh to go see her mom, got stopped in Minnesota, and then her mom passed away. So she has this guilt, right? I should have gone earlier. What if I just went? We're like, trying to help her through that. But you see now how mental health and the law connect, right? And come face to face. Okay, we also had election protection issues. We had a big election in 2020, right? And so we had the highest voter turnout in our US history, That's great. But then we also had kind of one of the biggest backlashes towards voting rights that we've seen since the 60s. And as Dr. Nadir said, policy affects practice. So the ability to vote, the war on drugs, this was legislation. These were people voted into office who made these kinds of rules, these understandings. So if the power to vote, right, the franchisement is taken away from our minority communities, because that's who it impacts the most, well, then the policies that are going to be in place are going to heavy-handedly, right, unfortunately impact our communities. So the protection of the voting rights, it's a lot of times in the media, we see like, oh, and this is part of our home, right? In the media, it's kind of talked about it's, preventing Black people from voting. Well, in our community, sometimes we say, yeah, it's preventing Black people from voting. We're like, that's our people. We're Muslim, we're everybody. That's all of our community. So if there is a larger population, because that is one of the largest minority populations, you think it's not going to come for the Desis next? It's not going to come for the Saudis next? Come on. We have to realize that all of these kinds of things impact all of us. We have to check our home as well as our community and make sure that we all have these protections and all these rights. So we also have the number one threat of terror in our society has been domestic white terrorism. That has been it. Media will tell us something different, of course, but they know this. But sadly, what the things that we saw when it comes to searching out and seeking out terrorism in the quote unquote Muslim communities, What did we have? Our financial institute, our financial donations were monitored. Our mosques are monitored. We're, anybody, willing to say they know somebody who got a phone call from the FBI who can raise their hand and say, I know somebody who got that phone call, right? Who was invited down for that interview. I will raise my hand on that. Walked into your house, sister said, inside this room. They called my mother, Dr. Nadir, invited her for an interview, right? So these are all legal questions also. Again, if we don't have representation, what happens? They walk into our house. What else do? We say, I don't want to look bad, so let me invite them for some tea. Let me talk to them. And this is still happening. This was happening after 9/11, it's still happening now. But let's look at the disparities. Let's look at the differences, right? I know people right now still in jail from the Holy Land Foundation. I don't know if anybody's still young or old enough to remember that, right? When they were looking at our donations and saying you're funding terrorism. So there's so much disparity. And we're just seeing it front and center. So now we have the January 6th happening. A lot of those folks were able to go home. People are not only defiling, but they're defecating in the house of, the house of democracy, the Capitol. And these folks go home and then we're like, we're gonna call you, we're gonna work on the case, right? I mean, this is part of the inequities, okay? It's part of the inequities. Let's see, also incarceration. Now, as we talked about war on drugs, we talk about, part of our society, America is one of the countries that incarcerates people the most at the highest rate. So we have it's a disproportionate amount of people of color who are incarcerated. We have people who are Muslims who are being incarcerated as well, part of those numbers, right? And then we have people who are converting inside as well. So when the pandemic happened, what did we have? Well, while we on the outside were feeling lonely, guess what? Prisoners, people who were incarcerated, they also weren't able to have any visitors. Now, if you know anybody who's ever gone through that, first of all, just because you're arrested doesn't mean you're guilty. So we have plenty of people who were now caught up in the backlog. They weren't able to get their hearings as soon as they would have liked because there's a backlog. And now you also can't have a visitor because COVID. Now, you're right, you have all of this stuff going on. Chaplains aren't able to come in. So the emotional health, the mental health of those who are incarcerated, we're not saying they're guilty. They haven't even had their trial yet. So we know of a case, somebody who was incarcerated there for a good year, finally had their trial, they were innocent. But all of the stress from them, their family, all of this kind of stuff. There was a lack of access to the vaccine that was in there also. So all of these things were happening to our communities, right? As well as brothers and sisters also from our community. So now that's kind of out in the society. What else was going on? I'm getting phone calls from women saying, do I have any rights? My husband took my stimulus check. In the US, we got stimulus checks. Spouses were stealing it from their spouses. Dr. Nadir is going to talk more about what was going on with families. But these kinds of things are going on. Injustice. And some of these people be the same ones who be like, we need to help the people in Palestine, but you're stealing from your wife. We need to help the people in Black Lives Matter, but you're stealing from your wife. Like, what is this, right? These are the kinds of legal issues, though. Do I have rights? Can I get it? Can I get it back? I don't know. Who do I call, right? All of these kinds of issues. Landlord-tenant issues. There was a moratorium, but did everybody get the word? Just like Juneteenth, right? So some people didn't get the message. So there was a situation of young college students in our area. They were now dealing with lockdown. So you got the stress of lockdown. How do we all have laptops? 3 of us working on laptops now in our little apartment. And they got an eviction notice during the pandemic. And they were like, I thought I heard something about a moratorium. Well, now little college student, what are they going to do? Big landlord, you're not supposed to do that. No. What would, inheritor from Yale do? What would inheritor child from Yale do? What would they do? Call their lawyer. But what do the rest of us do? Scramble. Google. We're like, I think, and then we get laws from like England. We're like, England, I think it applies. Doesn't apply here, right? So it's key for us all to have this kind of access. Fortunately, with the work that I get to do with some of my corporate partnerships, we were able to get those college students access to attorneys. And they were able to speak to an attorney, and the attorney said, you are sure right. There is a moratorium and it applies to you. So go back and use the 3 most powerful words in the English language. My attorney said, you can't kick us out. And sure enough, they were able to stay in their home. Now I'll give it to the landlord. Maybe the landlord also didn't have access to an attorney and he was mistaken. Let's give him that. But maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just banking on the fact that they didn't know their rights. Like most people of color don't, most young people don't. So these are some of the issues that we've been going through. We also had those court delays. We're also dealing with, they put people in marriage limbo. We had that with the court delays. We have that with our messages shut down, right? I mean, raise your hand if you're willing to admit you know somebody who was going through marriage limbo. They're like, I don't know if I can get a sheikh. I don't know if I need to go to the lawyer. I don't know how to get out of this. She just took off or he just took off and we don't know where we're at. The stress of that, right? Inside our homes. And then also online court was made a challenge for some. Everything went on Zoom. And you saw that meme of that lawyer who accidentally had the cat face and he was talking. He was like, it's not really me, judge, right? So there's some cute things that came out of it, but it was very challenging. You know, attorneys who have been doing their work in such a traditional way just had to shift and change. The clients, they didn't know what to do. Most of them, a lot of them wanted to be in court. They think I can present myself better if I can just come, right? But you can't, they were shut down. You had that, but then you also had some of the plus side when there were domestic violence cases. And typically you did have to come and the person who was abusing you would sit right there and look at you and stare you down. But now it was online. So that was kind of a plus side. But there was a lot going on. And the biggest thing was that people didn't have access. People didn't know. We need to have access. We need to understand what our rights are. If we don't know our rights, we don't have any. We have to have that kind of access. So some of the work that I was able to do in partnership with some of my community partnerships and Islamic Social Services Association and Dr. Nadir and Dahir, started having community conversations on Zoom, Zoomiversity, right? And we were talking about topics. One of the first topics that we covered was lawyer up in the magic words. Sadly, whenever we see these awful cases on the news of the police brutality, when we see this stuff, I never hear, I'd like to speak with my attorney. It's because we don't know to ask and we don't have the access. So the magic words in the US, not sure about South Africa, sister, and wherever anybody else is zooming in, but the magic words here is, I would like to speak with my attorney and I invoke my right to remain silent. And then we shut up. We remain silent. If we start talking, we just voided that. We have to learn these magic words. We have to practice them. So we were doing workshops. We're like, practice, say it, teach your kids, say it. I invoke my right to remain silent. We have to say those words. And I would like to speak with an attorney. And don't think that you're helping them if you're just like, let me just rationalize with them. No. I've been a public defender. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. But we need to learn these kinds of things. The rest of us don't know. Estate planning. We found that people are getting it. They're not doing it early enough. And it's too late. So when COVID, what ends up happening is we get phone calls. So-and-so, my uncle's in the hospital. My father's in the hospital. My husband, my wife is in the hospital. Can you help us get their will done? Their powers of attorney done? Guess what? No one can go into the hospitals now. It's COVID. You can't even have the visitors coming in, let alone a notary, let alone a lawyer, let alone witnesses, which is what you need to get all those documents done. So we were doing education on, listen, we have to get the stuff done while we're healthy. That's the time to do it. That's the best time. We need to have it in place. And our powers of attorney, even more importantly. The will is just if you die. But if you're still alive, but you can't speak for yourself, you need a power of attorney. Or you can't go back outside, you're stuck now, who's paying the rent? Who's taking care of those things that you can't leave the hospital for? That's why we need these kinds of documents. So we were doing this kind of education as well, to see the legal side of the public health crisis. And then also we had social justice Zooms to teach people about how to get affordable access to attorneys. There's tools out there now where we don't have to just, wing it. We don't have to just say, oh, I'll never afford that, so I'm just gonna Google, right? There's tools. So we were teaching how to get that access. And then also I was fortunate, because of the pandemic, to publish a book on how to be legally savvy. Alhamdulillah, thank you. It just came out in September. It's available on Amazon. It went #1 new release in 14 categories, alhamdulillah, and bestseller in 10. And the whole point of it was, I had this idea for 4 years. I need to write about this, but the time, because of the pandemic, slowing down, but also just seeing, oh my God, we need this. It's really for the rest of us. Those of us who didn't grow up with access to attorneys. Those of us who don't know. We don't have the uncle who's the lawyer that we can just talk to. And even still, if you have one uncle, you need attorneys on all different areas of the law. So that's what this book is about. It's fun, but it's really talking about these issues that we need to know about in love, in life, and in business, so that we can have more social justice at home and in the community. And also, I'm fortunate, and now I'm going to segue over to you, to get to teach about being legally savvy in love, which is a huge area, because so many of us just have no idea that marriage is a legal decision. It's a legal decision, no matter where, Sharia-wise, Islamically, and wherever you live, civilly. So, so I speak and guest lecture in Dr. Nadir's Before the Nikah Marriage Preparation course, and break down to these students, hey, listen, these are the kinds of legal questions you should be asking, not legal questions, but questions you should inquire to see if it's gonna be compatible legally for you. This is going to work for you. So, so that's always fun. And so those are the things that we want to continue to do. We need to continue to educate ourselves. We have to understand how to protect ourselves legally, have to know what our rights are. And everybody's not gonna go to law school. But so we need to use the tools, and that'll make us a stronger community. We need to get the target off our back. We have to be, as a community, savvier, smarter about these kinds of things. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Nadir for a marriage and family lens. You wanna, so you're just, yeah, I'll advance for you. Okay.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. So thank you, Zarinah, thank you, Dahir. You know, as you both were speaking, I was thinking about May 25th, 2020, when I couldn't believe before my eyes what I was seeing. The feet on the neck of George Floyd. And of course, as the mother of 3 Black men and the wife of 1 and the sister of 2, the auntie of 1, my heart sank. Okay. I am Muslim, I am Black American, I'm a mama, okay? And my heart sank. The anxiety that I felt personally. You know, we talk often about who counsels the counselor, who provides therapy for the therapist, right? My heart sank. My worry rose. The concern was there. When my family members, I had family members die of COVID. I had family members die during COVID. I had my sister-in-law passed away during COVID in Germany, and I couldn't get there. Couldn't get there to be with my brother and my nephew. Those were real things that were happening. They were happening to people of different ethnic backgrounds and racial backgrounds. But for me, on top of all of the things that other people were facing, I was also dealing with generations of anti-Black racism and the impact of that. And so this issue is personal. It's professional and it's personal for me. I just recently talked to somebody and they talked about COVID baby. And they said that their child is a COVID baby. That means the child was born during COVID. And that means that the child was in lockdown, wasn't able to go out and play and do all the things that kids would normally do pre-COVID. And so now the child is nervous to be out in public. That's a mental health issue, okay? We saw many of our community members, I mean, because reality, life goes on, right? And people, you know, we are a loving community. We want partnership, you know, we want romance and all the things that everybody, but COVID shut things down. So how are we gonna meet? I mean, we already had a problem as Muslims in America meeting people as it is because of our small population. That was already a challenge, right? And now COVID hits. How do we meet people? Okay, so we go online, but not only do we go online to meet people, we go online, court, and then we marry people online. Marry people that we don't know, okay? We already live, you know, thousands and different, we're not marrying pre-COVID even, people that we had a chance to grow up with, to live in community with, to, you know, to play double dutch with, or kickball, or go to the same elementary school. We're marrying people we don't know. And COVID just exacerbated that. And we find remedies, right? So of course the online programs, and some are very good. I work a lot with Baba Ali with Hafardine, and there are others. But the reality is to go online, to meet someone, to carry a whole relationship online, and marry someone online that you've never met in a season that is just not real, presents some problems, okay? And of course, not have the kinds of marriage preparation skills and knowledge about relationship building and all the tools that we need to sustain a married life, that's a problem. So we saw, even with that, and with people already married, we saw the divorce rate rising, okay? Because people are now saying, I don't really want to live with you anymore. You know, the reality is, I don't really like you. I mean, I could tolerate you when I go to work and I'm away from home 10 hours a day, and I come back and I'm just here for 2, and I help you get the kids ready, maybe. And then, you know, we put them to bed and then we go do our own thing, and we, you know, but 24/7, I can't do that anymore. And so we saw the divorce rate rising, but we also, sadly enough, saw the domestic abuse rate, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Zarinah talked about financial abuse with people stealing stimulus checks. So all of these things, this is the climate in which people were living. And on top of that, Black Lives Matter, anti-Black racism, you know, a fear of being able, even when we did go outside, to go outside because we don't know now what else is going to happen. You mentioned the janazas that people couldn't get to. My own experience, I'm still grieving because I haven't been able to resolve and spend that time with my brother. And I know he's in grief. The grief and loss that's unresolved within families. We had so many janazas at our local masjid alone. And normally where we have our janazas in the courtyard, they would be filled with people. They only went to the cemetery, and they were small, and family members didn't have that kind of normal support that they would have. But we had the invention or the advention of the Azza online, condolences online. So we not only did we get married online, we had condolences online. We set up actually Zoom, you know, condolences. Who'd have thought? But the isolation and the loneliness continues. And remember, this is one of the things we wanted: social justice at home in the community. These are issues that existed before that COVID and lockdown and anti-Black racism on screen just exacerbated. It wasn't that it wasn't there, it just exacerbated it. Next. So what we have been continuing to do, because our work both in the Islamic Social Services Association and Dr. Aneesah, Nadir and Associates before the Nikah program, has been to work towards healthy marriages, because we believe healthy marriages lead to healthy communities. Here we're talking about our Before the Nikah program, but before we even talk a little bit more about that, I want to talk about the Sakina Healthy Marriage Initiative and the National Muslim Marriage Healthy Marriage Month. And you might want to get that and just show the folks in the audience. I don't think folks on screen will be able to see it. But about more than 10 years ago now, I think, we started through one of our corporate partners and our work in the nonprofit arena with Islamic Social Services to develop the Sakina Healthy Marriage Initiative. And out of that came the Healthy Muslim Marriage Week. Healthy Muslim Marriage Week is the first week of Ramadan. And I got a lot of complaints about it. Yes, you turned your face and looked like, first week of Ramadan, why first week? We got some, we got to get to Taraweeh. Yeah, it's because that's the week that we start developing or resetting our relationship with Allah. What a better time than to reset our relationship with one another. That is such an important time to reset our relationship with one another as we reset our relationship with Allah. And I have to tell you honestly, one of the things that I saw in community and members of my community even were the brothers running out to go to Taraweeh and the women staying home cleaning up dishes from having fixed these big meals or prepared chai for guests, and they never got to engage in their spiritual development. So what I'm saying is, families, let's spend time, couples, let's spend time with one another, getting to remember the beauty of our relationship through remembering the beauty of the relationship that the Prophet ﷺ had with Khadija and Aisha and his wives, so that we can develop, because many of us don't have good examples of what a good relationship is. And so the Prophet, our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ provides us that. We see that in his seerah, and so this is really important. And so I really want to encourage people to continue this effort. Again, so Ramadan starts April 2nd. On March 28th, we're going to launch this year's Healthy Marriage Week, along with the graduation of the spring 2022 class of the Before the Niqab program. Now, what is the Before the Niqab program? The Before the Niqab program is a program that I was blessed to develop over 20 years ago. That is a program for a premarital education primarily for single people, for engaged people. We have had a lot of newlyweds. We've had some folks who've been married who've actually taken the course, because one of the things we recognize, and that was supported in Dr. Kalawi's research, is that people need premarital education, that our community is lacking when it comes to preparing people for marriage, both from an Islamic standpoint, as Muslims, even with general practical relationship skills. Most of us don't even know how to talk to one another. We don't know how to communicate. We don't know how to problem solve. We don't know what marriage in Islam is. We don't realize that marriage in Islam is about helping each other get to Jannah. And so that's the essence of the program that we have. And I'm very grateful to say that Sister Shema Iman has been conducting an evaluation research of our program. And so far the research is looking very good. And she'll be we'll be publishing some of that work that she's doing. And we're just so excited and so happy. She's a MSW student out of Georgia, but her school is, I think, in Denver, Colorado. So we're really excited about that. And so one of the things that we think is really important is to continue to engage. We know that FYI now has a program. They have the toolkit. They have the prepared to be prepared, right? Prepare to pair. But in addition, of course, we have the Before the Niqab marriage preparation program. So let me tell you about Before the Niqab. As I said, it's about 20 years old. How we changed things. Pre-COVID, we were in person in a small classroom. And so we had a smaller number of people. COVID hit, we went online. Thank God for Zoom. And of course I had to get up to speed. I'm older generation, right? So I got up to speed, learned how to use, and because many of us had to, right? In order to stay in touch. And so what we did was we were able to now make the Before the Niqab program available throughout the US, in Canada. Last year we had students from the UK, and this year we have a student from Bangladesh. We had a chance, and so that was amazing to be able to do that, to engage in that education for the single members of our community, the engaged members of our community, to and we strongly support increased marriage education across the continuum, from single throughout, from till, Allah knows how long. We have a family member, a community member who was married 60 something years. She just, what do you want to say? I don't want to say celebrated, acknowledged the passing of her husband of 62 years. And it was been a year ago. And so we have a lifespan, and that's what we want to promote, a lifespan. Allah blessed me during the COVID period also to publish my book, Before the Nikah, the same name as the course. COVID gave me some time, and COVID gave me some resources. COVID gave me a book coach, a writing coach. COVID gave me the support of my daughter. So together we were typing and writing, and now we have book published on, now it's available on Amazon, Walmart.com, and BarnesandNobles.com. So it really shares a little bit about the principles from the class. There's also part 2 section, which is a section for parents and community members. So that, hence, social justice at home, and part 2 is on what the community needs to do to support our single members of our community. So in addition to that, and lastly, I think we'll say here is, we want to increase awareness and education regarding domestic violence and the impact on families and communities. I'm so glad to have partnered with Peaceful Families Project, with Project Sakina, through the Islamic Social Services Association, all the work that we've done over the years, because social justice is important at home and in the community. So, there's a flyer. This is our upcoming course. So we're currently in the spring 2022 session, and this is fall 2022. So if you know anybody who's interested in taking the course with us, wherever they can get online, we have people waking up 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning in the UK. So wherever you can get online, enjoy and join us for this journey. It is a 11 to 13 week course, and it all live, yeah. And the synergy of the students in the course is amazing. And then from that, we've developed the Before the Nikah community. And so once they graduate, then they join the community. And so they're able to stay in touch and have relationships with them. Because remember, they're going to go from my class out there, and very few people are going to be saying the things we're saying in class, like you've got to vet, for your future spouse. You need to really get to know who your spouse is. You need to really do some research. And people aren't saying that. People are saying, people spend more time planning the wedding than they do the marriage. And so these are some of the messages that we convey. And we have I think 13 principles that you will read about in the book, but when you take the class and you have the students together, really working together and developing that sense of confidence and knowledge together, it's so important. So I want to encourage my brothers and sisters in the mental health community to invite folks to join us for this course. It's affordable. We find a way to make it affordable, even for people who normally wouldn't have the funds. But this is a program that we think Zarinah is one of our instructors, and so she does a whole session on legal matters. We have a whole session on domestic violence. We have a whole session on health and on communication, and there's so much. So inshallah, if you want to learn more, www.AneesahNadir.com. We have a small DrAneesah.com. We have a small ad in the journal program. So now let me wrap
We also posted the website link in the chat for folks.
Thank you, Dahir.
Yeah.
And so now what's next? So I want to let you all know that I am honored and thrilled that I get to partner with Dahir and Zarinah, because they bring so much amazing information to the community, both on the community macro side as well as on the clinical side. And so we want to encourage premarital and marriage education, including cross-cultural issues in marriage. We think that that is really important. You know, our community, we're almost done. Our community is a very diverse community. And one of the things we realized during COVID is that many of the Muslims within our community wanted to be allies, but realized they didn't know much about what it meant to be Black American, you know. And so we really need to, and as, you know, as mental health professionals, no matter what our cultural or racial background is, if we're practicing in the US, we need to know the Black American story, because it's all of our story. And we want to remember that some of the earliest Muslims were Africans who were the ancestors of those who are currently Black Americans. So, and the work and the striving that they went through, so to make this possible for all of us. We want to get legally savvy education, as Zarinah mentioned. We want to have legal access. How can we be in this world and not have legal access? Even one of the first questions that Zarinah mentions that we need to ask is, are you married? You know, and then what kind of marriage is supported in your state, you know, here, or your province? You know, is it a community property, a separate? That's a legal issue. And so that's important. Community engagement, as Dahir mentioned, is important for us to be able to advocate and to address many of the community issues, even on a policy level. But if we're not engaged, how are we going to do that? So we have to be active, even as mental health professionals. I know that it takes a lot of time. We're working our practice. We got to go home to our families, but we have to know what's going on here in this country. We need to increase awareness of the needs of the BIPOC community, the Black, Indigenous, people of color community. We need to increase the number of doctors. One of the things I saw early on in this COVID situation is that we got a lot of doctors in the Muslim community, but very few of them are Black American. And so, speaking to some of the issues, the health concerns, many of these are issues, and I'm going to even say this, we're using this phrase now called medical apartheid going on. I know that you're from South Africa, you know what I'm talking about. And so, and then we need to increase the numbers of therapists who are Black American and also aware of the Black American struggle and the issues of the BIPOC community. So, and are, as Sister Selma said, who are able and willing and ready to talk about the issues from a spiritual and faith-based perspective for those for whom it matters. Right? We need to increase sensitivity, awareness, knowledge, and commitment among our Black community allies. So we had a lot of people saying that they wanted to be allies, but they didn't know how. We need to learn how. I mean, time is up. We really need to learn how. Wherever you are on this journey, you can't be in this field of mental health and not be aware of some of the issues, the longstanding issues of racism, institutional racism, and injustice in the society, and how it impacts people's mental health. We just can't. We gotta know what to do. And to be allies, this one woman said she prefers the term accomplice. Now, my attorney daughter says that sounds too criminal for her, but what she was saying was that she wants people who are committed to get into good trouble breaking the law if it needs to be, if the law is bad law. So allies or accomplices, whatever you prefer.
May I add one thought on that?
Certainly.
One of the things that also really came to the forefront during the pandemic was what I like to call faux activism. There was a lot of people who I think saw racial equity and social justice activism as something that could increase their brand awareness. It could get them clout in certain arenas, and it could help them avoid bad publicity, right? If you weren't saying something, then people were going to look at you and say, why not? However, there's been, you know, a real lack, I think, of continuation in terms of the momentum and the follow through on some of the statements and the promises that were made. And so I think it's important for all of us to do some self-reflection and to ensure that both at the individual level, at the organizational and institutional level, we're doing everything that we can to follow through on some of those commitments and statements that were put out during the pandemic to address racial equity, now that things are starting to sort of go back to normal and business as usual, to make sure that we don't forget those things that, you know, were sort of in the forefront a year or two ago.
Thank you, Dahir. So important. It's so important you said that, and it brings to mind, I was in a chamber meeting. I work with our local chamber, and they had this big person come from the U.S. Department of Chamber talking about all these issues of diversity and equity and what they were going to do. I didn't see nothing, no show of it. So I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? You put this out there, what are you going to do? Well, do you know how much angst I had to even stand up and remind them? But somebody's got to stand up and remind them. Okay, because else, as Dahir says, it's going to go back to business as usual. And so it takes some courage, but we're doing this for the sake of Allah. Allah says, stand firmly for justice. And that's what we need to do. And so I'll close with that. We also have to increase normalization of getting mental health care in the mosques and from the minbar. The stigma is still prevalent, even within our own communities. And so even when I say it's time, you know, in our community, it's so important for the imams and the mental health professionals to partner, as Sister Selma and Imam Medjid did. They're looking at me like I'm cross-eyed. Still, alhamdulillah, not as many as they used to 20 years ago, but still. So we've got to work on that. So I encourage, one step is to get imams in your community talking about a healthy marriage as we go into Ramadan, and also mental health and what we as a community need to do about that. Is there anything else left? And this is my contact information, but it's also a way to reach Dahir and Zarinah in the meantime. So with that, yeah, absolutely.
You can also find me on Instagram at Zarinah Nadir ESQ.
So if anyone has any questions, you can jump in. Sorry about that, guy.
How do you spell Zarinah?
Zarinah. And Nadir, Nadir. See chatting going on.
There's some chatting in the chat.
Any questions in here or comments?
I have one, I'm just formulating.
Okay, yeah, no, take your time. Thank you for being here, everybody.
I actually did have a question.
Yeah, brother.
I think it might be more for Dahir, but when you mentioned earlier about full activism, how do you?
I'm sorry, I lost the audio.
So brother was saying his question was for you, Dahir. He said, how do you filter out the faux activists from the kind of genuine, sincere activists?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is check their track record, right? You know, right now in these days and times, we all have public social media profiles, right? We're on many different platforms. And so it's very easy to verify sort of when people started caring about some of these issues. When did they start posting things about Black Lives Matter, posting things about racial equity, posting things about police brutality. And oftentimes we'll see a start date that, you know, coincides with things like the George Floyd murder. And then we'll see a sort of tapering off of that activity, you know, 3 or 4 months afterwards. And so, you know, we have now, I think, pretty accessible tools to understand sort of what people's perspectives are, what people's opinions are, because people are willing to share quite openly what's on their mind, what they're doing, what they're thinking about. The second thing is, you know, asking people like, so what are you doing now? Right? Like, you know, there was a lot of activity, a lot of marching, a lot of, you know, sign making. We got, you know, like in California, for example, you know, people were asking for a whole lot, and we got, you know, for example, a street in Sacramento got renamed like Black Lives Matter Boulevard or something. It's like nobody was asking for that. That wasn't in the 10-point list of demands. So I think it's important that we sort of follow up with people, like I said, on a individual level, as well as on a institutional and organizational level, to ensure that the things that they, have actually done as a result of all of the activism. And there was a lot of work put in to organize people and to activate people around racial equity. Like what is the current status of the actions that were put out there during this time? So those are, I think, two kind of clear ways. I'm sure there are many others. Zarinah and Dr. Aneesah, if you have others, please feel free to share as well.
I think you hit it.
On point.
It's a great question.
Yeah. Any others?
One more question.
Did you
Time for
formulate?
one more question.
Yeah, so my question is, it's kind of, I think it's for all three of you, but it's kind of the balance of capacity versus time. So building capacity, some of what was mentioned before about one of the C's of like people and transferring people from this book. But also in general, just building up capacity in organization work. Sometimes things take time. And so how do you figure out the balance of building capacity, but then also addressing the need that exists? While you're waiting for that capacity. I know it's a really vague question.
No, it's not. I know what you're talking about because that's what I've lived for the past 20 years.
Did everyone hear the question?
So
Zoom?
repeat the question.
Were you able to hear it
I
on
heard
Zoom?
I heard it.
Okay.
So the question is, how do you balance building capacity at the same time that we're engaged in the work?
Right, when it's an urgent need.
Yeah.
And then even in collaboration, right? So if an organization recognizes that it's the time to uplift another organization, but that organization is struggling with capacity, it's time to build capacity. So how do you?
It's tough.
And then even an individual, right? Like,
Yeah.
How do you?
It's tough. It's very difficult, and at least I found it to be challenging. But what I found that is needed is people who are committed to the cause. So, and who aren't those people who are here today and gone tomorrow. You can't do this work and be here today and gone tomorrow, because it does take time. The capacity building is something that, and being able to do the work, whether it be clinical or macro level work, and be out there and be in the trenches and get the word out there while building an organization, it takes a lot of effort and it takes money. It takes money. Now, see, if we had the cash, which is one of the C's that Dahir talked about, you have the cash, then you can afford to hire people to stay back and work on building the organization while the other people are out in the trenches. But if you don't have the money, then it's very difficult. You need the people and you need the money to be able to do it. And you need committed people, and it takes time. Did you want to add to that?
I'll let Dahir go ahead if he has something to add.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the hardest sort of points of tension, right? Is that people want to see outcomes. People feel like there are emergencies that need to be addressed right away. And it's really hard to sort of do that, slow work of building relationships and institutional knowledge and capacity and all of that stuff. People often will see it as being inefficient or not responsive. So I acknowledge that. However, I think, many of us who have been doing this work for a long time recognize that the problem is huge. Like the problem is not something that's going to be solved this year. My program, in about 2 years, we granted close to $200 million to around 100 organizations, nonprofit organizations. And that amount of money, while it's a lot, it's not enough to change the condition of LA. Like we couldn't fix the challenges that were created by mass incarceration in Los Angeles with $200 million. And the requests that we got for funding were like probably over 200, sorry, maybe like $500 million worth of requests or so. So, you know, the magnitude of the need is far greater than what the resources actually are. So I think people have to, you know, get a reality check and to understand that, you know, you have to be specific and targeted in terms of what you think you can accomplish, but you have to know that it's not going to be solved overnight, and that the only way that you'll get to some level of sort of real transformation, which is, you know, that's what I'm after. I don't like putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds. I don't think that is a good use of any of our time and expertise. It's like, let's fix these problems. And so to do that, we need transformation. And to do that, that does take time, and that does take building capacity. So we have to be focused and specific about the things we can accomplish in the timeframes that we need to be accountable to whoever we need to be accountable to, while at the same time, I think using our voice and presenting the vision that is more aspirational and transformational and sort of longer range in terms of what needs to be done.
Thank you. And there's so much more to say to that, but I think that really addresses it. And we see another question here, but our moderator is telling us we need to cut. So we're sorry if we weren't able to address the question here, but please, we're inshallah here throughout the rest of the conference, and Dahir is on WOVA. So please get in touch with us personally, and we can inshallah just continue these conversations. So Jazakumullahu khair, Brother Iqtidar, for helping us here, and you awesome guests here in the room and on the Zoom. We appreciate you. And let's continue this work. Jazakumullahu khair.
Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure working with you, Dahir.
Good to see you, Dahir.
Love you guys. Y'all take care.
Okay,
Assalamu
thank you.
alaikum. Great job.
Welcome.
See you on WOVA.